Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this ReadyGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tons of news for the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. I'd really like to begin with an interview which 4gamer.net managed to snag with Mr. Atori, who is one of the principal designers slash engineers of the PS5. The interview is in Japanese, but you can get a pretty damn good understanding of what was said, of course, utilizing Google Translate. I'd also like to thank Juan, who actually DM'd me regarding this interview. I'd have probably missed it otherwise. But the first of the many questions which were asked was, what I found interesting anyway, was how the PS5's airflow was considered by Sony. And while they did apparently use CAE, computer aided engineering, excuse me, a lot of the design decisions were actually from real world experiments. Basically, what they did is they were building different models of their PS5 using transparent plastics, and then they utilized dry ice and essentially figured out where the smoke from the dry ice was flowing throughout of the case, and of course also taking different temperature measurements as well. Basically, it was a ton of practical engineering which was used during the bring up of the PS5. According to Atori, CAE was mostly used on the design and bring up of specific elements of the console, but when it came to assembling the whole thing together and figuring out how the package worked as a whole, as a cohesive unit, that's when they started to use more practical tests. If you watched one of my older videos, which was kind of debunking the whole thing of the PS5 overheating, I did kind of touch on some of this stuff where before the console is even in a remotely kind of retail package, there were tons of tests which are done to just figure out how the console would behave in terms of the overall cooling solution before final parts are even, slightly ready to be assembled. And then after that, of course, we start to shift towards real world tests with things which were closer to the approximation of the PS5's APU, in other words, kind of engineering sample variants, and then those kind of tests were conducted in numerous environments. So essentially, you can almost think of it as testing a PS5 in a really cold environment, testing it in a really hot environment, and so on and so on. And these tests, which Atori is discussing here, were very early, where they were just trying to kind of figure out how air would flow around the case. He also went on to explain that the size of the fan at 120 mm in diameter and 45 mm thick was used because the larger fan diameter and size essentially means that it's quieter in operation. Again, I did go over some of this stuff in my PlayStation 5 teardown video, but what's interesting as well is he said that he always wanted to use liquid metal for the TIM, thermal interface material, but I'm going to read this part verbatim. Since liquid metal is conductive, if it leaks onto the substrate side, it will short circuit. Above all, it's highly corrosive to aluminum, used for parts such as heat sinks. In order to handle such materials, it's necessary to take measurements for the manufacturing equipment as well. That's why we took 2 years to prepare to solve these problems. Sony seem, from the wording here, to have used a custom-made product, but perhaps it's based on gallium. Now, the reason, of course, that Sony aren't disclosing this is for obvious NDA reasons, so there are still a lot of questions to exactly how they achieve this, because otherwise what can happen is the parts would degrade over time. And this was one of the main criticisms I think that people were making originally when they were hearing about liquid metal for the PS5. Hardcore overclockers particularly will utilize this for PC, but it's generally not for long-term usage. It may be for heavy overclocking attempts or something like that, but generally they won't do this for long-term because, as mentioned here, liquid metal is, corrosive. Plus, naturally, liquid metal equals boom if it touches something that's electrically conductive. You don't want it to short 2 points on your $500 console. So that's why Sony did create this specific custom solution here. Unfortunately, we don't actually know the exact composition of the material, in other words, the actual types of metal which were used. I do want to read the next part verbatim because it was explained as to why they used such a difficult material. It already said, and I quote, "The main reason is cost. The standard for thermal design is to spend money near the heat source. As an analogy to general thermal design, let's say you have a system cooling structure that costs 10 yen for TIM and 1000 for a heatsink. If you change the TIM of 100 yen here, you can get the same cooling effect even if you use a heatsink of 500 yen. In other words, the total cost can be reduced. Even after overcoming the difficulty of handling and adopting the manufacturing process, the PS5 was finally able to adopt a liquid metal that can be expected to have great effect. The main heat sink that cools the APU is connected to the substrate via a shield plate. For the A side of the substrate of the galvanized steel plate, SPCC steel plate hold commercial. The APU side of the A plate has a square hole, and the block part of the heatsink is designed to come in direct contact with the APU. Another thing that I found absolutely fascinating is confirmation that the PS5 does indeed have temperature sensors. There have been a lot of scare stories for both the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 that, oh my god, they're overheating or whatever. And as I keep saying, I'm very skeptical of any of this, particularly when it comes to long-term instability. That isn't to say that you won't get defective consoles, because of course you will, and I will be interested to see if we do get Yellow Light of Death, as we saw with the PS3, or Red Ring of Death, of course, for the Xbox 360. I'm sure that there will probably be a small number of consoles early on which have issues, but when it comes to runaway thermal problems, I'm very skeptical. And Atori actually mentions this. In addition, the temperature sensor mounted inside the APU, they are mounted in 3 different locations on the main board, and the fan uses the APU internal temperature and the highest temperature of the 3 sensors as the parameter. Long story short, the fan speed adjusts depending on the temperature of the APU as well as the hottest other point in the console. And that he also mentions that APU behavior data for each game is going to be collected. In other words, the temperature versus the fan speed. So obviously, if you're playing, I don't know, a 2D indie action platformer game, just for sake of argument, it obviously isn't going to push the system anywhere near as much as the next God of War or whatever, because of obvious reasons. Therefore, if you're playing the next Horizon, yes, the fan is going to, the system is, excuse me, not the fan, the system is definitely going to produce a lot more heat. If the fan's producing heat, you've got some problems. But yeah, if the system's producing a lot more heat with a title, this is something that the system itself is going to start noting. So what was said is that when the load, a sustained load, continues for long periods of time, the fans will eventually start to kick in to maintain a set temperature. Further to this, it seems that these profiles and fan profiles can actually be adjusted via updates. So if Sony notice that a specific game, for example, is causing the system to become a little bit warmer, or perhaps the reverse is true and they notice that out of, let's say, 1 million consoles, the average temperature is X, whatever X is, that's well within tolerance, they can simply release an update, and if that software is running, they can simply reduce the fan speed, thus making the console quieter. I personally believe this is a really smart decision, and I don't know this is the case, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Xbox Series X employs very similar technology, that the system could be updated with these fan profiles. I did mention this a couple of times in the past, that I was pretty sure that that was how it worked. In fact, I was also given some information quite a while ago that even the algorithm which is used for decompression on the SSD for the PlayStation 5 can actually be updated via Sony as well, which does increase, of course, the throughput of data. Now, whether Sony will do this in the long run, who knows, but I was told that they do have this capability, and naturally, having updatable software and firmware to accommodate different situations and different standards and different, other conditions as they arise is definitely great. And moving from Sony, let's discuss tons of stuff for the Xbox. First things first. If you spend 7.5 billion US dollars, do you allow your competitors to enjoy the same products? That's been a question which has been ongoing, of course, since Microsoft coughed up 7.5 billion US dollars to purchase Zenimax. Naturally, Zenimax has a ton of studios under its umbrella, including, well, Bethesda and id Software. Those two in particular have caused a lot of let's say discussions online, because the question has been, will Elder Scrolls 6 and other such games be available to the console? Well, there's a really interesting interview over at Kotaku, and Phil Spencer was actually asked, can you even recoup the 7.5 billion on this acquisition without allowing Elder Scrolls 6 to be on PlayStation? And Phil Spencer very, very, very quickly responded yes. And he said, and I quote, I don't want to be flip about that. This deal was not to take away games from another player base like that. Nowhere in the documentation that we put together was, how do we keep other players from playing these games? We want more people to be able to play games, not fewer people to be able to play games. But I will also say in the model, I'm just answering directly the question that you had. When I think about whether people are going to play and the number of devices we had, and we have xCloud, PC, and Game Pass, and our console base, I don't have to go ship those games on any other platform other than the platforms that we support in order to make this kind of deal work for us, whatever that means, end quote. And yeah, I kind of agree with Spencer. I mean, I don't think. I think with the whole console wars, which personally I don't really subscribe to, I think console wars are a bit, I don't know, I just don't think that they're very beneficial to anyone. I think you should just play games however you feel. But I think with the Xbox, it's no longer just a chunk of plastic. It's literally everywhere. It's basically Skynet at this point. That's the best way. That's the analogy I'm looking for. It's Skynet. It's in the cloud. You remember how on like end of Terminator 3, I'm sure it's Terminator 3, where Kyle is explaining that they couldn't destroy Skynet. It was everywhere. It was in dorm room computers and everything else. I can't remember the exact quote, but those of you who saw the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. That's basically Xbox now. It's morphed into something a lot more than the chunk of plastic which is in your living room, like when the original Xbox launched. I actually still love the original Xbox, off topic. I really need to replay Panzer Dragoon Auto at some point. Anywho, getting back to the point, yeah, so when it comes to the Xbox platform, it's no longer just a console. It is definitely xCloud, which obviously is a ton of different devices. I mean, Spencer at this point is even trying to figure ways to get it on Apple devices, because Apple really loves their whole walled garden. So I'm hoping Microsoft can kind of circumvent that. But it's also consoles, naturally, but it's PC gaming and just about every other method under the sun, like Game Pass, XCloud, PC gaming. It's kind of interesting because during the Xbox 360 era, you can basically say that Microsoft abandoned PC gaming. They pretty much did. Like when Oblivion, for example, like 2006, 2007 kind of time frame, Microsoft had pretty much given up on PC gaming. And I think that there's a lot to say about Valve. As much as I don't think Valve are a perfect company, they did really save PC gaming along with a couple of other companies. And then obviously subsequently, thanks to efforts of like AMD, we saw the Mantle API, and then of course Microsoft and Kronos Group and some other companies really started to push the boat out with DirectX 12 and Vulkan, and now we have a really good infrastructure on PC. So I think I'm kind of like waffling on a lot of stuff there, but I do agree with what Phil Spencer is saying, that the PC platform alone, along with cloud gaming, is an absolutely huge market. It is absolutely massive, and you can quite happily like use xCloud In the future, you could use xCloud on an Android device, you could use it on the Windows PC, you could use it on whatever, and there is a ton of different options to actually get users in front of those experiences. I don't know, honestly, if Phil will allow those games to come to the PS5. I mean, I kind of hope it does from the perspective of I want people to experience those games, but simultaneously, if I were Microsoft, I don't know if I would put those games on the console, at least at launch. Maybe I would do something like a 6 or 12 months kind of exclusivity. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. Okay, at this point, I'm going to don a fireproof suit if you just give me a moment to do the zip up. Okay, I'm good. There is a rather interesting discussion which is being had at the moment on Twitter, and this is thanks to a Twitter user who's fairly well known for leaks by the name of Kitty Corgi, although they have now changed the name to Yuko Yoshida. And yeah, basically what they've said, you can read it on screen yourself, but long story short, they're saying that the Xbox Series X's GPU is a mixture. They've said, for example, the front end is RDNA 1, the back end is RDNA 2, and so on and so on. And this has caused an absolute Twitter storm and a ton of controversy online. And I'm going to start out by saying that unfortunately, this is one of those instances we do not have a full answer because of a couple of problems. The first problem is AMD, as of the time I'm recording this, have not given a block diagram. There's no block diagram at all for RDNA 2. We have a ton of leaks, and we're going to get into that in just a moment, but there's no official block diagram, and even the information that I've had, I've been pretty exhaustive in my RDNA 2 information, including performance targets, infinity cache information, lots of other stuff. I don't have enough information to even slightly be able to create a block diagram. For example, how much cache is on CUs, like data shares and all of that stuff. I just couldn't do it because I don't have enough information, and so we're inferring and guessing a lot of stuff. The second issue is some of this information does come to us via driver entries, and we'll discuss those in just a moment, and so they could be wrong. And the third problem is that while Microsoft did a pretty good job at covering the Xbox Series X's GPU at the Hot Chips conference, there's still the technical term is crap ton of stuff that we don't know about the GPU. For example, they say that the ray tracing solution is customized compared to the desktop implementation. How? There's not really that much information how they've customized it. There's no information on the exact compute queue structure of the GPU. Yes, we know that it can handle 4 and 8-bit operations, but that doesn't tell us much. Like, how does the compute structure actually work on the deeper level? We don't know that. There's a lot of information missing on cache stuff. Like, we know level 2 cache on the GPU is 5 megabytes, but again, a lot of that is kind of higher level stuff, and we don't know how it works fundamentally. Okay, so I think I was originally, you know what? Let me start slightly differently. I was kind of pulled into this originally by a number of people messaging me and asking, "Could you comment on this?" And to begin with, I was thinking it might be a leak from Kitty Corgi or now Yuko because they had previously leaked a ton of RTX, excuse me, 30 stuff rather accurately, but the more I dug into it and was reading their comments, they said in one of them, "Don't be embarrassed," and I quote, "Don't be embarrassed if you can't understand my analysis," end quote. So from that, based and other things, I'm thinking it's an analysis. I don't think it's a leak. With that said, maybe I'm wrong, and perhaps I'll clarify this more soon. So let's get into how I think this information originated, and it comes to us via a Twitter post, and it's about 3 weeks old as of the time I'm recording this, and it's from a individual by the name of STBLR. This user has leaked a ton of stuff, including clock frequencies, uh, specifications of Nave 21, 22, 23, and even 31. Yes, RDNA 3 here is listed, although whether this is just one variant of the SKU, we don't know. RDNA 3 is already being bought up. Like, it's yeah, it's no longer like an early sample or anything like that. It's being bought up right now in the lab, to my knowledge. In fact, I think they're even maybe slightly past the design stage or something like that for RDNA 4. But anyway, getting back to the point. So Narvo 21 Lite, we believe, is the Xbox Series X. And we can kind of tell this because of previous leaks, but you can also just see that the number of CUs here is registering as 56. There's 56 on the Xbox Series X, but the difference is that four of them is disabled, and you can also see that the number of CU per SH here is listed to be 14. Now, if we bring up the Xbox Series X hot chips image, which is titled GPU block diagram, and you can indeed see that this seems to be right. I've rather helpfully marked this. So the shader engine is what I've put a red block around, and the shader array is the one that I've put a green block around. And here, if we count the number of dual CU, which is inside the shader engine, let's do this together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we take 7 and we times it by 2. Yep, that's 14. So complicated math is over. You will notice that there are darker dual CUs right there. Those are the disabled units. They could be anywhere. Those are just examples where Microsoft have put them. It will depend upon the whether there was a defective die and where that was and blah blah blah. So long story short, we are pretty certain that that is custom and that is to do with Narve 21. Further, though, if we scroll down, he says, looking for it. Where is it? Ah, there we go. So almost at the very bottom of this section, you can see number of packer per SC, excuse me, and it's 2, which is the same as Narve 10 and the other RDNA 1 Silicon. This is compared to 4 of Narve 20 onwards, or Narve 21, 22, 23, and so on, and 31 all seem to be 4. So there are definitely some changes here that Microsoft have made for their GPU compared to base RDNA 2 spec. However, the problems become that this is a very high level overview of the GPU, and if we look at the CUs, so Microsoft have actually given us an insight into the actual CU of the GPU. Hang on one second, I'm actually trying to find it. There we go, I'm being very professional here. I've got everything prepared ahead of time, he says sarcastically. There's an Xbox Series X dual compute unit slide, and if you look at it from a very 1,000-foot view, there's definitely a lot of similarities between this and the one that you could find in the RDNA 1 white paper, which is available from AMD directly. I think it's like page 5, and you can see the dual compute unit design there. The problem with this is that there are the obvious questions which arise of, okay, but is the desktop implementation like this? And the answer would be, because I honestly don't. I don't know if the desktop dual compute unit for RDNA 2 is similar to this or not, because again, we do not have those block diagrams. Now, personally, I think that the Xbox Series X GPU is RDNA 2, but with some concessions made for size of the die. And possibly here, there are some cuts to be made. Such as the aforementioned number of shader engines and stuff like that. But this is assuming, of course, that the driver information that we have is correct. And I think that it's a lot of guesses, honestly. My sources for the Xbox are a lot more limited than the PlayStation and AMD. I have done some digging in the past of the Xbox, and to my understanding, I was told that the Xbox Series X is pretty much desktop implementation of RDNA 2, but with a few custom tweaks which Microsoft needed. Example would be for backwards compatibility like Auto HDR, that type of stuff. Microsoft have also said that they've got custom implementation of ray tracing. We don't know what that is because they've detailed diddly squat. So I believe that the Xbox Series X GPU is very similar to the desktop, but with some changes to accommodate for the fact that it's in a console and possibly a few cuts here and there. I was told, however, that the PlayStation 5 version is not quite the same as RDNA 2. I was told that Sony customized more stuff, and they've done this in the past with the PS4 and the PS4 Pro. So Sony have a legacy working with AMD on customizing more of the solution. And that's why it becomes a lot harder to kind of do an exact comparison because, well, honestly, Sony have documented crap in public at the moment. We don't have any block diagrams whatsoever. And so there's just a lot of misinformation and guesses. You can certainly guess a lot of the functionality of the PS5, and you certainly do know a lot of the functionality of the PS5 because of official statements, interviews, and so on. But ultimately, we don't have anywhere near the dual compute unit block diagram that Microsoft have provided us here. We do know that both use a very similar ray tracing solution because Sony did go into kind of how BVH was created during the Road to PS5 event, and it's almost exactly how Microsoft have described their implementation and AMD have described their implementation in various patents as well as technical discussions. But how they exactly differ from one another, because I was again told that Sony customized their ray tracing solution, it becomes like super duper fun. So I personally believe that the Series X does have basically full implementation of RDNA 2 with obvious stuff that consoles doesn't need just removed. With that said, I could be wrong, and Kitty could be correct, because unfortunately, as of the time I'm recording this, I don't have RDNA 2 block diagrams. What would be really nice is a dual compute unit block diagram. That would be super spiffy, to be able to make any type of meaningful comparison. We don't also have cache information and that type of stuff for various elements. Yeah, I feel a lot of the information we have is kind of higher level overview and with even less information from AMD officially. I'm going to definitely be covering this more exhaustively when AMD does eventually decide to release the information, which I'm guessing is going to be after the official reveal. I think the reveal is going to reveal. So that was terrible. That was a terrible sentence. But I guess the official reveal will go into the higher level stuff, probably more like performance targets and other crap, like they did with Zen 3. And I suspect that it's going to be down to reviewers, and when the embargo lifts, then we'll get access to it. Yeah, I just kind of think that's how that's going to work, unfortunately, which is kind of frustrating. I have reached out to a couple of people to ask if they can shed any light on this, but again, most of my sources are for the desktop implementation of the GPU and from Sony, so I don't know if I'll be able to get an answer for the Xbox stuff. But I'll reach out to a couple of people and find out. But yeah, I will be going much more exhaustively into this. I know some people may be a bit disappointed that I'm not going super technical into this, but I think that that would be very intellectually dishonest because ultimately I don't know how it does differ from RDNA 2. I could look at the driver entries really exhaustively and start to do like tons of research on this stuff and kind of guess and fudge stuff, but um, it would be kind of like guesses based upon information. I think we're so close to RDNA 2 being released at this point. It's not really worth it. I think we're just going to get official confirmation one way or the other. With that said, though, thank you very much for watching the video. The normal stuff, like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Have an amazing day. Bye for now.